The next session that we have is a very interesting one. So we got a lot of queries on data-driven approach in product management, and we had several people who were interested to speak on this topic. So we decided that we'll go ahead with a panel discussion. So we have a seasoned moderator in the form of Mr. Arun Iyer. He's a seasoned product professional. We have a senior program manager from SAP Labs, Mr. ShivaKumar, and we have a new entrant in the domain of product management, Mr. Hardik Savaliya. And all these three gentlemen would brood on the topic of data-driven approach in product management and how can democratized data help in effective decision-making. So let's welcome our speakers and panelists.
Go on. Thank you, Nishant.
So welcome, Arun. Welcome, Shiv. Welcome, Hardik. The stage is yours.
Yes. Yeah, take it. So, okay. So, good evening and welcome to the P Camp. Thank you, Shalini. I can't seem to see her, but okay. For the keynote and laying out the inspiring vision of upskilling 50,000 product managers in a couple of years and bringing the software products economy to a $30 billion size. Thanks to Gautam for this very insightful talk on product-led growth and gamification and the attention economy. There is a very wry observation that there are only two industries in the world who refer to their customers as users. One, of course, is the software industry. Any guesses on which the other one is? Yes, so it's the illicit drugs economy, and they tend to capture your attention and grab your basic biochemical processes the same way. With that, we will move to this panel discussion on data-driven decision-making. We have on our panel here Mr. Shiva Prasad and Hardik, and they will be sharing their insights on how they used data to make better product decisions and to scale their products. So welcome to the panel discussion, Shiva and Hardik. Could you just take a minute to introduce yourself, please, Shiva?
Thank you, Arun. First of all, thanks everyone for joining in here physically and also people who have dialed in virtually. So myself, Shiva, full name is ShivaKumar H S. I'm a product manager at SAP. This is my 15th year at SAP, spent like a 1.5 decade at SAP. Tried different roles like SAP consulting, product management, and doing various roles there. So I've done my master's from NITI Mumbai, if you know, and I also have like 2 years of industry experience. So yeah, looking forward, I'm super excited and I'm also nervous because I'm here in the States for the first time. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Shiva. And could you introduce yourself, Hardik?
Thank you, Nishant. I'm Hardik Savaliya. I'm currently a product manager at CData Software India. We are a data integration, having a data integration product. So I am handling a product portfolio of 278 connectors. And I am an recent MBA graduate from IIM Seymour. And as Nishant has mentioned, I am new to the domain. So you will see a lot of new fresh perspective from my side.
Thank you, Hardik. So let's get started. First question, let's hear your views about this. Do you think a data-driven approach to product management is still relevant in today's world where you have a plethora of tracking tools, you have a lot of computing power that can churn and analyze or cut, slice and dice any amount of data that you can throw at it pretty much. So is that still relevant to product managers, or do we leave that job to the tools and to, say, data analysts, right? And it would be great if you could share an example from your previous experience. Shiva?
Sure, Arun, I can talk about it. Maybe in the interest of like people to understand what's the product management all about, right? So first, to get the baseline route, the product management is a role which is like focused on strategy and business. At the end of the day, you are solving a customer problem, you're providing a solution, right? So in that sense, data-driven approach gives you like a structured approach. Not only look at data from a qualitative, like a quantitative analysis, but then you have a data from different sources and you kind of develop a 360-degree view of your potential customers or existing customers, and then use the data to drive your adoption use cases so that you can really prioritize your investment use cases and so on. So as I think some of the speakers already talked about product-led growth, product managers are the ones who are really accountable in terms of product growth. So that means their KPI is really measured on how many customers are we acquiring, how many customers, the existing ones, are staying with us, right? So in that sense, maybe I want to talk about an experience I've had at SAP, right? So we had a SaaS product which we had launched, and while we were kind of going through that exercise of figuring out the addressable market, we have a huge installed base. So we had to look at our data and do the slicing and dicing and figure out who are all the customers we can go and tell them to start small, right? So then we had lots of data with our system. Then we understood there are about 50 to 60,000 organizations who had subsidiaries present in smaller locations who are like pretty much standard. They could really adopt a SaaS product than any other companies. So we use that in a various stages, like acquiring a customer and then like activating them. Like while you're in the implementation stage, we kind of offered them what are the easy to win scenarios which they can hook on to so that the implementation time is a lot quicker. And then lastly, around getting their experience right. We're talking about NPS and other feedback coming from our existing customers and otherwise. Like how do you really get the feedback and how do you capture the emotions right so that the data-driven methodology was really used to a full extent to really keep our existing customers happy. So this was a good experience to really like venture into the market and provide a hybrid cloud path for our existing customers. So that was a wonderful experience.
Great. Thank you, Shiva. Any thoughts you would like to share, Hardik?
I would also like to share my experience and why I feel that it is more important nowadays. So basically, like I said, I am handling a 278 connectors portfolio, and out of those 278, I found out that 44 connectors are not performing that well compared to others. So when we dig deep into the reason, we have found out that some of our connectors are lacking features, or we have found out that some of their sources that we are making connector for is in declining stage. So basically, previous hypothesis was we are lacking marketing for those 44 connectors, and the reason was completely different. So it helped me to understand the why part behind it, why it is happening. And along with that, when I go to the boardroom and put my insights to the board members, they will gonna reject me at the first moment, because they will say that you are too noob to say this. But at the same time, if I provide sufficient data along with my analysis on top of that, they are definitely gonna listen. So it is also helping me to explain the why part. So yeah. So it is extremely important to answer the why part, then explain.
Great. And thank you for sharing your experience, Hardik. Let's keep going. In the current pandemic, and there have been uncertain times, the shape of data change. Imagine something like Google Maps, which relies on historical data to predict what traffic patterns would be like, and how that would have been entirely gone for a toss during the pandemic when traffic patterns changed dramatically. So how would you go about adopting data and insights, and what would be your learnings from the same in the context of the pandemic?
Yeah, maybe I can talk about the Google Map experience. I was driving and the map was showing 1.5 hours, but maybe because the historical data was showing 1.5 hours, but I could reach in 30 minutes. So that's the context, right? So every day you have new things to learn and the context keeps changing. So especially pandemic has taught us a lot of things, especially for me personally as well as professionally, to take things at a time, which means the pandemic has really forced us, and like mostly the customers, the way they are thinking, right? The expectation is not coming down, it is always up, but the patience level is coming down. So they're not ready to wait. So when we are having a conversation with our customers, either to get the feedback or to the go-to-market, they are not ready to listen to the conversation like what's coming after 2 years, after 3 years. They're like, let's talk about what's coming in next 6 months. Like what are we really getting now in next 3 months? So that's the kind of conversation we are having. In that sense, it has become a lot more relevant for product managers to look at the data and the context right, so that if at all, like there is a situation where you cannot deliver, the business model itself is changing. Can you bring in the partnership there? Can you work with your partner and deliver much faster? So maybe you're talking about something like MEP launch, right? Like the most viable product requirement you're going to ship. So in that sense, if you cannot do it alone, can you bring in your partner so that you can really deliver much faster? So that's what the pandemic has actually taught us, and looks like it's going to stay forever. It is not that just because of pandemic this has changed, and the whole mindset has changed, where in the SaaS world, people are expecting much more capabilities to work in a much shorter time frame. So having said that, data-driven product management is going to get you some far where the tools are available to make the, derive the insights, but end of the day, product managers are really forced to work on it in a most timely basis. Thank you.
Thanks, Shiva. I'd say great insights there. And the pandemic has actually taught us the importance of data. Compared to earlier pandemics, we've been able to use data analytics and data insights to build better real-world products like vaccines, which have been developed with new technology, and better modeling of how the pandemic would spread, and hence take the right preventive measures to contain those. So I think, as Shiva mentioned, it's becoming even more relevant for product managers to be data savvy and data literate, especially after the pandemic. Let's move on. We know that data and analytics go hand in hand. So how can we use data to improve customer experience? What's the greatest problem-solving experience that you've had in this context?
Maybe you want to go first? Then.
Sure,
Yeah,
Hardik.
I would like to talk about customer retention, how we can retain customer. So as a part of data analytics, we could create customer cohorts, as Gopal has already mentioned. There are several methods of creating cohorts, such as demographic, geographic, psychographic, let's say free users versus paid users, or let's say recently churned user versus recently users who are having a recent upgrade. So once we decide right kind of cohort or combination of cohort, then we could analyze consumer behavior at each step of customer journey map. So from these kind of analysis, we could identify some of the early trends, like why we are not retaining customers. So I think that could be helpful. I would like to give one example of let's say Zomato push notifications. I hope everybody is aware of it. Let's say we have standardized that metrics, push notification. Let's say in last 3 months, out of 100 users, 11 users have made orders using those push notifications, and we have standardized it. Then let's say we are creating new push notification for the users, and the number is less than 11. Then we could find out that our quality is not that good, and number is greater than 11, and we are also measuring consistently. That says that marketer deserve a good promotion.
Thank you, Hardik. Any thoughts, Shiva?
So maybe I want to talk about the moment you talk about using a product management methodology, like acquiring new customers, right? So for any company to grow, like a product-led growth or a product company, it has to really acquire new customers, and at the same time, they have to keep the existing customers happy. So apparently now most of the organizations have put the onus on product managers, where product managers are responsible to do this job. So in that sense, product managers are not only like working with the marketing team, where marketing team anyway busy selling the product, but then they will soon vanish once because their sales bag is closed, right? So the product managers have to really take them like product managers, like a front runners, where once the sales cycle is closed, they have to run faster with the early care program or early adopters, so that the existing sale opportunity closes, and then you get the customer onboarded. You means you're activating and the revenue triggering is happening. At the same time, you're also paying attention to the customers, because any existing customer who's not taken care is going to leave, which will eventually impact the churn rate, that means you're not going to end up with your KPI of total net revenue, whatever retention rate we are talking about, right? So the data-driven product management is to emphasize not only about numbers, right? So you talk to your council members, you talk to your customers, your partners, or the interviews. There is a lot of emotions, there is a lot of sentiments which needs to be factored in, and based on that, the product manager is deriving the insights, and again, it is related to your management and it relate to the stakeholders, and you jointly act on it. And lastly, you're learning from that experience, right? So whatever actions you're taking based on, like you are investing on some of the customer use cases and you are increasing the customer base, end of the day, whether that action has resulted in getting you more customers or the customers happy. So it's all evident. When you go for your yearly NPS scores, it's quite evident whether customers are happy or not. So eventually, the product managers has the 360-degree view of what you are making, as in what the decisions you're making is really turning out to be a good one, bad one, but then end of the day, you keep learning and you really keep moving in the right direction.
Great. Thank you, Shiva. So great points on why and how data and data-driven decision-making is still very relevant for product managers today. But many of us might have experienced in organizations where it's difficult to convince an organization which is not historically data-driven to change their mindset and start becoming data-driven. You will often hear statements or hubris, which coming out in statements like, decisions are made from the gut, not with data and Excel, right? And how do you convince, or how do you cajole or slightly change the path of the processes so that data-driven decision-making becomes a part of the organization's culture? What are the biggest challenges that you find in such organizations?
I can talk about challenges. I think it goes on forever, but then probably in the interest of time, I'll cut down, right? So when you talk about challenges, I think largely you have one which is coming from outside, right? The challenges, even though your product is right, you are difficult to sell, your macroeconomic factors are not supporting, and so on. So most likely you end up not being an expert to address all of the challenges which you're coming from the outside, but you can only get things right from an internal side, right? So even to get a control of what's happening around, the best thing is to keep learning. You know, you will have your analyst who could help you. You will have your friends and families, a partner ecosystem, the communities who are trying to guide you and help you with all the pointers from the outside of the things. But when it comes to internal, for a product manager, as you rightly said, product manager has to work with different setups, including the internal users within an organization like engineering, quality, security, all sorts of things, teams you can think of end of the day who are there to build the product. And you're also working with different stakeholders like partners and the community managers and so on, right? So end of the day, you need to really have that motivation to go that extra path, because very often as a product manager, you're going that extra mile to convince your community manager to take this topic as a webinar topic, or maybe you're convincing engineering lead to prioritize on the right use cases because you are bought into the topic so much emotionally, or whatever data points you have, right? So these are the few challenges you face, in order to influence a large stakeholders, you have to speak a different language. Maybe you have to sit down and talk to them in a different language in the different user groups. And lastly, if you have a conviction, I'm sure you will be able to get that priority right, and you will be able to secure your budget so that you can move on with that.
Great. Thanks, Shiva. Any thoughts, Hardik?
I could say biggest challenge is cultural resistance. Most of the people do not want to change the way they work, change the way they put data into a particular software, or they make data entry. As a part of this challenge, we could see empty data somewhere. We could see duplicate data, and all those challenges we are facing. Along with that, frequently changing in data capturing methods could also be the problem. Sometimes we could not able to figure out how to convert qualitative inputs of customer to quantitative one. Some customers are, not willing to share their qualitative inputs with you, or they want you to be happy. So they will say it is a good product. Or sometimes they don't even know what to improve in product, but they are not happy with the product. So these kind of challenges, as a part of solution of these challenges, I would say there is a dire need of thought leaders in every particular organization.
Thanks, Hardik.
Maybe I can
Sorry,
add
go on. Yes, go
one
on.
more point on the industry flavor. So we talk about product management in an industry context, right? So it also depends the maturity level of user. So if you go to retail sector, probably they are much more advanced in terms of technology, maybe because the ecosystem is really evolved much faster. But if you go to an industry which is oil into gas and chemicals, probably the adoption level is still lesser because there is a lot of resistance to change because the nature itself commanding the stability and so on. So we cannot really generalize, but more and more the industry demands the particular challenges. I think the product managers have to navigate through and then build something as a value proposition for those kind of users.
I think great insight there, Hardik and Shiva. As you mentioned, it can be very hard changing the mindset of management. And as you mentioned, it's often very industry specific. Industries that are built around management of risk, BFSI sector, oil and gas, iron and steel, many of these industries are built with heavy processes to mitigate risk, and that makes it difficult for them to run experiments and do data-driven decision making. A quick suggestion is that you could take a leaf, as a PM, you could take a leaf out of the Agile Manifesto. The Agile Manifesto is specifically written for products, but taking it in a broader context, try to use data-driven decision making in one small, non-risky part of the organization. If that works well, that is usually enough to convince the management that yes, data-driven decision making is good, and we should now roll this out across wider parts of the organization. Great. We can, due to the paucity of time, we can take a couple of questions and then do a quick sum up. Before the questions, any quick book recommendations from Hardik and Shiva?
I do read a lot of books, so I can give a lot of recommendations. But then what I remember recently is one which is written by Matthew Syed around the black box thinking. The reason I recommend is it talks about how we can learn from particular industry like airline industry. There's a chapter which talks about how you can validate each and every decision made in the industry so that others can learn. So there are other books I can talk about, but then this is the best one I remember, from a past read.
Any book recommendation, Hardik?
Yeah, I would say Essentialism.
Okay.
It would help you to prioritize your decisions. And one more book is Hooked by Nir Eyal.
Thank you for those book recommendations. We can take a couple of questions, Nishant, and then sum up and close.
Yes, Arun. So let us move ahead with the questions by the audience present here. Any questions from any one of you? Yes, gentlemen. So, yeah.
Black Box Thinking by Matthew Syed. It's available on Amazon and Flipkart.
There was a question from a gentleman there. Yes.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Nikhil Vishnu. I'm a PM at Milestone. My question is how to avoid biases when you look at the data. So most of the times when you start looking at the data, you already kind of have an answer in your back of your head. And most of the times when you look at the data, it might validate that same answer. But how to question that decision that you're trying to take from the data, right?
Let me just offer a couple of thoughts. So there's a saying that if you torture data hard enough, it will confess to anything, right? So you will know when you are trying to torture the data and make it say what you think it should say, right? Also, the specific question that you mentioned about how do you prevent human biases from going into data, especially if you're going to automate those data systems, is not a solved problem. You can read up some case studies and some discussions on how this essentially philosophical problem called the trolley problem has real world implications in self-driving cars, right? So it may not be, it's not an easy problem to solve, and it may not be entirely possible to remove human biases from data. But yes, let the data speak to you rather than you yelling at it could be one way to not mislead or not have data mislead your decisions. Any thoughts, Hardik and Shiva?
I think nicely said, but if you want a formula to do it, so it's very hard to find a formula. You have to figure out your own formula, but there are various recommendations, like I talked about data-driven product management. The quantitative or qualitative will only be 50 to 60% of your overall, as in the parameters, another 20 to 30% if your confirmed guess, which means it's done by your external research analysts and others, part of it to pay. And there is another 20 to 30% is your educated guess, which is your gut feeling, right? So if you want the formula, that's how it is, but that percentages could change based on your own experience and your own confidence level.
Okay. I think we must be out of time. Can we?
Yes, just one last question. So,
Sure.
any
From,
yes,
okay.
Gentleman over there.
Hello. Okay, so I want to ask a question about our application. So recently we made some changes in the payment gateway. Actually, we applied intent payment gateway flow. So our hypothesis was that the percentage of people who are actually coming to that particular page, more percentage of people will be converted to a customer. But when we actually did a funnel analysis and compared the 30 days data of the two versions, the percentage actually dropped. The amount of time of conversion, the average time, as well as the median time decreased. So when we compare it with other applications like Zepto, Zomato, all of them are actually using the intent payment gateway. So is this the correct way that we came up with the conclusion, or like we have to do only A/B analysis or other platforms?
So since this is specific to your application,
Right.
Can we take this offline? All three of us will be available and we can discuss this.
Right.
Again, thank you very much for attending and for the great questions. We'll quickly summarize in just 1 minute. We spoke about how data can be used to convert qualitative experiences or qualitative inputs to quantitative, and how to use that to drive adoption and prioritize features. We took an example of how adoption of SaaS features for activation can be done by using data. Also, how you can dig through problems like missing features in the connectors and then convince senior management to take the right actions on them. We spoke about how Zomato and other systems like, for example, Netflix use data and personalization or recommendation systems to build hyper-personalized products for you, which essentially get you hooked and increase adoption and usage of those features. We spoke about the challenges that happen in organizations when they're trying to move from a very fixed process mindset to a data-driven and more agile mindset, and took some questions. Thank you very much. Thank you, Hardik. Thank you, Shiva. Thank you, Nishant.
Thank you all three of you
Thank
for
you,
this
everyone.
interesting panel discussion. We had several questions online, but we cannot take them in the interest of time. We sincerely regret for that, and I would request the organizing committee to keep a little